I think we need to be having more honest conversations about motherhood and the myths and beliefs that we have about it. I think it's time that we start redefining what we want motherhood to look like.
Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello, and welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection podcast. I am your host, Heather Boyd, and I'm excited to have Lisa Carpenter as a guest today. Lisa is a high-performance coach, life coach. She describes herself as being an anti-performance performance coach, and we're going to delve into what that means. But for any of you who are feeling like you are juggling a lot of balls as a parent, as someone who has a lot of life goals and a vision and adapting to these new roles that you might have with a little one in the house, Lisa's really going to put some perspectives on this, on that idea of being really driven and trying to balance things out. So Lisa, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Heather. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and serving your community, hopefully with some real great nuggets that they can immediately apply to their life.
I have no doubt. Now, is there anything I missed in your intro that you want people to know about before we dive in?
Not particularly. I work with a lot of driven and ambitious women and men who are wanting to create more out of their life, but more doesn't actually mean doing more. It's more focusing on doing less. And that's why I talk about being the anti-performance performance coach, because oftentimes when we look at performance, it is focused on all the things we need to do, all the things we should be doing, pushing harder, driving more. And often the levels of success and performance that we're after really come to fruition when we look at resting more, when we look at showing up for ourselves with more compassion. So it's to be a better performer means you need to become a better leader of yourself. So that's really all the things we're going to be talking about, how we can lead ourselves more powerfully in our lives so that we can be better wives, mothers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, executives, whatever your, titles or roles are. It's how can you be the best version of yourself so you can show up even better in those roles.
Love it. And you mentioned the word leader, and I want to touch on that first, because for the parents who listen to this podcast, they have gone through one of the most profound shifts that they can go through in roles, expectations, the time and energy and effort that they're putting into parenting a very young baby, while also still kind of straddling who they were before becoming a parent. What is it that you mean when you talk about leadership?
So first, I think it's really important that I am completely transparent with your listeners. And motherhood literally took me to my knees. It has been the hardest role my entire life, from baby all the way up. I've got adult children now, and it's still like, I'm like, man, there's no expiration date on this. Like, am I ever going to be done? So it's different challenges, obviously, between an infant versus an adult child. But motherhood is really disruptive, stepping into motherhood, especially when you've been an ambitious, driven woman and you've got big things that you want to do in the world and you've been working on your career. And all of a sudden you're like knee deep in diapers, sleepless nights, feeling like garbage, and wondering how you can possibly do it all, and still actually having the belief that you should be able to, which is what so many women bump into, right? Like, I should be able to manage all of this, because we're constantly bombarded with these images. And for me, it was a real dismantling of my identity, like who I was as a leader, who I was going to be as a mom, how I wanted to show up for both, the expectations I was putting on myself about what I believed to be true. So, unfortunately, back in the day, I really picked up the story that even though I had given birth to 2 children, that I didn't have the mom gene, which then became problematic because that story just allowed me to constantly be hard on myself and tell myself that I wasn't doing a good job because I was measuring myself against the moms who, loved being a mom, who like lived to be a mom and lived to bake the cookies and lived to go to the PTA. And all of that stuff made me want to poke my eyeballs out. So I felt very, very alone and isolated in that because I still wanted, this career. I wanted to grow my business and I wanted to be a good mom. And I had no idea how to do both. So I think it's just really important to have more of these conversations so that we can normalize that it's okay to struggle with being a mom. It's okay to love being a mom. It's okay to not always love being a mom, to like love your kids and be like, wow, this sucks. I don't even get paid well for it. And the rewards usually come like so much further down, in the years. It's not until your kids really hit adulthood that you get to see the fruits of your labor. So I just thought that was important to start with. So I'm not even sure if I answered your question in there. So if I didn't, ask it again and I'll do my
Yeah.
best.
Well, I think what comes up for me is that delayed gratification with parenting. That's a grand experiment. We don't know what the outcome's going to be, and we aren't given the rule book. We don't have an instruction manual, and we're shifting so much in, as you say, our identity into parenthood and motherhood that it's a profound shift on a very, very deep level.
It impacts you physically. Your body's different. Like I remember being in the bathtub being like, what has happened here? And is this going to bounce back? Like, is this a thing? Is this going to come back? Emotionally, because you're so sleep deprived. And what most people don't understand is, lack of sleep is crazy making. I mean, we've all seen a toddler who hasn't had enough sleep. They're crazy. You can't rationalize with them. Yet we forget as grown adults that when we are sleep deprived, we are actually in the same state of mind. Like our logical thinking brain is offline. So we are not ourselves. So, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, like you don't have enough like connect with yourself. You barely have enough time to, you're supposed to be taking care of the baby and taking care of the family and doing all the things and juggling all the balls. So it just really is a taxing time on all levels. It's temporary, but when you're in it, it feels like it's never going to end. And it's very hard to not be in your emotions. And when we're in our emotions, we don't make kind of logical decisions. So we want to feel our feelings. We want to acknowledge what we're feeling, but feelings aren't facts. But oftentimes when you are, with a new baby or a young child, feelings is all you like, you just lose yourself and you lose yourself in your kids' feelings, you lose yourself in your own feelings. Everything, feels like it can be going to hell in a handbasket one minute and then be amazing and beautiful the next. So it's a lot. It is a lot.
Absolutely. Well, and it brings me to something that you touched on a few minutes ago, just around the self-care piece or being able to take care of your own needs at a time in parenting, especially in the early years. Although, as you point out, this continues for a very long time. The investment may change, the physicality of parenting may change as our kids get older, but it's still pretty intense. When everything in early parenting feels like an emergency or a top priority, or our kids' needs are like front and center, how do we even begin to prioritize ourselves without feeling like we are dropping the ball on the role that we have in front of us, this new role, or maybe a couple of years in trying to adapt while not letting ourselves literally disintegrate in this early period?
I think that we need to start with making it okay and acknowledging you're going to drop balls. And nothing bad is going to happen. As long as you keep your kids alive, you've done a great job, like 2 thumbs up, right? I think we have to bring it back to basics. Like, is your child alive and thriving today? Okay, you've done a good job. That's the basic. I've dropped balls many times. There is no woman I have ever met who has done parenting perfectly. I don't care how many books you've read, how many coaches you've worked with, how many experts you've listened to. There is no perfect parenting. So we need to lower the bar on our expectations. And just lowering that bar is an act of self-care and compassion. Letting ourselves accept that things are the way they are. You don't have to like them. to accept them. But when you accept them, you're going to lower that resistance and you're going to open the door for self-compassion to show up, right? You want to start showing up for yourself in the same way that you want to be there for your kids, right? You're not going to beat your kid up, hopefully not beat your kid up if they've done something wrong or dropped a ball. You're going to meet them with compassion and love and kindness and talk it through and how can I support you? And you're going to be okay. But so often we don't give that same love and compassion to ourselves. So that is problematic because then you go through parenting constantly being hard on yourself, which then just feeds this underlying story that you're not good enough or you're going to ruin your kids. You cannot ruin your kids if you show up and do your best, whatever your best looks like, and it's going to look different from day to day, but your intention is to love and care for them, right? Like that's all your kids need. They don't need all the extra stuff, but what they need from you more than anything is that feeling of love and safety and belonging. And if we can allow our kids to feel that, and as they get older, you get to communicate with them, better what's going on. Like, oh my God, the amount of times I've had to take responsibility with my, 10, he's 13 now, right? But the amount of times I've had to take responsibility for my behavior or something that I said or did that, really wasn't me being my best self and coming back to him and saying like, you know what, that wasn't okay. And I want to apologize. And this is how I could have handled it differently. Like my parents never did that for me, right? It was just like, you just said it, forget it and move on. So that's the first thing that I wanted to start with. The other thing that I want to give your listeners is a really powerful acronym that they can check in with that will support them going, oh, yeah, no wonder I feel this way. And that's HALT, which stands for hungry, angry, or anxious, or really could be any of the feelings, frustrated, whatever you need. But, HALT makes a nice acronym. Lonely and tired. So lonely, listen, you could be with your baby 24/7 and feel completely isolated and alone, right? So many of us in a time where we're more connected than ever, we can feel more disconnected. So obviously I haven't been in the baby space for a long time, but I'm sure if I was scrolling Instagram, it would probably make me feel like a horrible mother, like I don't fit in, right? Like there's just more information to feed into that story I had. But the reality with HALT is when you have two or more of those things happening. So let's say you didn't sleep, pretty normal for new moms, and it's been 5 hours since you ate. Baby's fed, but there were also laundry to do and stuff, and you just forgot to eat, which happens because we just learn how to disconnect from our bodies. We prioritize everybody else. We minimize everything that we need for our own survival. So now you're tired and you're hungry. Well, right away, you are going to be not your best. You can't show up as your best. You're going to be triggered. If your baby is crying, you're going to be more reactive to it. So when we talk about the foundation of self-care, I always come back to that acronym of HALT. Am I fed? Have I gotten some sleep? What am I doing to connect with myself? Even if it's 5 minutes of locking myself in the bathroom and counting to 10 while I breathe. And am I tuning into what I'm feeling? So instead of just going through the motions, am I taking a moment to just check in and say, what am I experiencing in this moment? Is it frustration? Am I feeling not good enough? Am I feeling excited or happy or whatever it may be, right? These tiny moments of connection. Because for most new moms, they don't have time for, I'm going to go to the spa for the day. Like, that's lovely. But if we can just come back to the basics of, can I get some rest? Can I stay committed to feeding myself and hydrating? Most people are exhausted if they're dehydrated. That's one of the symptom of dehydration. Can I take a minute to connect in with myself and just count to 10? I have a client who is a relatively new mom, and one of the practices we're working on is that she puts the phone on the other side of the room when she's breastfeeding her baby so that she can be present and give herself that moment of connection with herself and with her baby versus scrolling social media because she feels like, well, if I'm breastfeeding, this is like my way of relaxing. So hungry, angry, lonely, tired. That, like, if you can just tick those boxes every day, like, have I eaten? Can I take a nap? Can I just sit and close my eyes for a minute? What can I do to connect to myself? That's where I would suggest everybody starts, not just new moms, but everybody. Instead, it like keep it simple before you try and do all the fancy self-care stuff.
Right. Well, I think about that phone across the room too. When it's in our hands, and when I was breastfeeding, we didn't have smartphones yet, so I don't fully understand the pressure in terms of that connectivity nearly as much as parents coming through now. But I think about the distraction that gives away from the present, that if you're scrolling, you are able to distract yourself from any of the feelings or hunger or loneliness or tiredness that you're
Yeah.
feeling. And you miss out on exactly what you're saying,
Yeah.
which is to be present.
And I want to emphasize the impact that this has on our babies. So we may not think like they're babies. What are they picking up on? But energetically, they're picking up on everything. So imagine going out for dinner with somebody and having your phone in front of your face the whole time. So they're talking, they're trying to connect with you, and you're in your phone scrolling. That is the same energy that your baby is picking up on. And this is why we have adults now who are feeling like they're disconnected from their world because as infants, this is what's being modeled to them. So even before we had smartphones, we still had disconnect, but now it's getting worse. And then we're wondering why our kids are struggling to connect. Why? So it's just something to be mindful of, right? Like our energy impacts our kids. And we often think, well, if my kid would just behave, I would feel better. And I always flip it around and say, because I know in my case, it was, what do I need to do to regulate myself? Because my child is just mirroring back to me my internal state of being. So if I'm disconnected, my child's going to be disconnected. If I'm having a tantrum on the inside, my child's going to be having a tantrum. So really being mindful of the phones, and especially if you're nursing in the middle of the night, do not pick up and look at your phone because now you've signaled to your brain, blue light, wake up, and you're throwing off your circadian rhythms. So it's just best to, that time that you're nursing your child, which I know can feel like an eternity when it's like 24/7 in the beginning, it is such a small amount of time in the grand scheme of your life. And I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, but I was one of those very busy, disconnected moms back in the day. And I don't really remember my older two boys being young. I don't remember being connected with them because I was constantly wanting to not be connected
Mm.
because I was focused on other things. So, everybody's going to have their path, but I think it's important to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think about just in terms of that connectivity with our kids and the distraction piece and being so driven that we're looking for something. I feel like for me, it's looking for something that's worthy of our time when we're in a role that we may not fully appreciate the value of it. Like
Yeah,
there's got to be something more important I could be doing while I breastfeed or while I rock my baby to sleep or while I'm sitting here while my child is playing.
right,
And perhaps it's the reframing of what's worthy of your time and attention.
right. Well, so many of us have wrapped our identities up in our achievements, and we've been chasing our self-worth through the things that we do, right? The certificates, the promotions, the job, whatever it may be. And motherhood is not something that we truly value as an achievement or accomplishment, right? So many women say they lose they lose who they are because we don't have that strong, many of us don't have that strong connection with what it means to be a mom because that wasn't modeled to us growing up in the way that maybe it needed to. I think things are shifting now. So to be present, the type of clients that I work with, they struggle to be present in their lives. Like I struggle to be present in my life. So having a baby is like the ultimate test of like, can you be here now? Well, if you couldn't be present before you had a baby, just because you have a baby doesn't going to suddenly make you present. And then again, that internal conflict starts around like, because when you are present with them, you're also going to hear all the chatter that's in your head. And we spend our lives trying to get away from the relationship with ourselves, with distraction, with achievement, with doing all these things. And our kids are really calling us to be present in this moment and be with them and be in their world. And for many, many women, that is incredibly, incredibly challenging. It feels like I talk about calm feels chaotic because chaos has become such a status quo for them. It's so normal for them. This like nervous system that's constantly on high alert. So just that being present with your baby can feel almost dysregulating to some women.
I can, yeah, the word uncomfortable is coming up as I picture that discomfort with rest or discomfort with being present. And we like to avoid uncomfortable things, but we
Yeah.
don't have to avoid it. We need to go through it. There's something on the other side.
We as humans seek pleasure. We don't like to be uncomfortable. And, for the women that I work with, they're really good at doing hard things. They're really good at pushing themselves. They're going to be the ones that run the triathlons or, pushing themselves in the gym or, doing 75 hard or whatever that is, right? But the way that I talk about it is the hard things that my people need to do are actually what most people would consider easy. Like being in a float tank, sitting for an hour nursing your baby without phone, without TV, just being present with your thoughts, going to bed early, getting more rest, allowing yourself to stay in bed instead of doing the laundry and doing the dishes or leaving the dishes in the sink, gasp, right? Like nothing bad will happen if your house isn't pristine and perfect. So those aren't hard things. But for the type of women that I work with, those are the hardest things because it forces them to be in the discomfort that they've been trying to avoid, those feelings of not good enough, the racing voices in their head, all these things that we're constantly trying to avoid feeling. When you're present, you can't avoid feeling them. But because most of us haven't been taught how to be with our emotions, right? Like we actually haven't been taught how to even name them or how to process them or to just allow them to be there. We've just been taught like we got to get away from this. This doesn't feel good. I got to get away from this. So we avoid being with them. And it's only when you allow yourself to acknowledge, wow, I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling not good enough as a mom. I'm feeling really frustrated. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling, like I don't matter anymore, or I have no relevance or importance. I feel like a milk machine, right? I remember that, like, oh God, is this all there is? And my child would only breastfeed off of one side. So I had like one giant boob and one no boob.
I have the
Like it
same.
was like a Halloween monster. I'm like, this is awful. So, allowing ourselves to really be with those things is what will open us up to recognizing that feelings aren't facts. We can be with them, we can acknowledge what we're feeling, and then we can move past them. And ironically, as a mom, that is one of the biggest gifts you can give your child is to be able to help them identify and acknowledge what they're feeling, not make them wrong or bad for feeling it, and support them in moving through it so that they can find a better feeling. But we as parents are like, oh, but I'm not going to do that for myself. We're just not going to feel this, and we're going to stuff it down and hope it goes away. So
Yeah. And we're just going to go, and add more projects and just keep almost running away from it.
it's a distraction. We create distractions in our lives to not feel what we're feeling. And eventually, I believe everybody has their day of reckoning, and some will either lean into that call or some won't. But what happens is if you continue to spend your life spinning all the plates and trying to run away from how you're feeling and the thoughts that you don't want to be with, you will end up exhausted, burnt out, adrenal fatigue, hormonal disruption, yelling at your kids all the time, disconnected from your partner, disconnected from yourself, wondering if this is what life is all about because you've ticked all the boxes. Where's my fulfilling, beautiful life that I should feel happy about? Because it's on paper, it's there. Everybody sees you as living the perfect life and having all the things, and you feel completely empty and unfulfilled and incongruent on the inside, right? So you're more integrity with the life out there than you are with the life inside yourself. So it's a journey. I think kids start to open the door on that. But again, like, your kids are always going to be such a powerful mirror of what's going on for you.
Yeah, well,
They just keep handing the
absolutely.
lessons, right? Here's the
They
lesson. Here's the
do.
lesson.
They do. And they will keep handing it to you until you learn it. And then you move
Correct.
past that. I think, the big difference in some ways with infancy versus the age of our kids at this point, my kids will call me out on it now. They have the verbal skills and the awareness to say, when you respond that way, I know you're not really listening. Like, oh my goodness, thank goodness they call me out on it. Babies can't do that, of course, but it's all, they have such a higher level of awareness of where is my attention and am I present?
Right. But I think babies can call you out. It's just we misinterpret the signals,
Mm,
right? Maybe they're not hungry. Maybe they're just needing that connection. Maybe they're needing you to be present. Maybe it's not just the dirty diaper. Maybe they just need to be held and
mm.
talked to and played with.
One of the supports that I give families when things are not going well, whether it's sleep or something else, is just spend a few days being really deliberate about being connected. It may not feel like that's what's happening because, of course, we see the problem. We think it's external to us. So we try to solve it as if it's external to us, like sleep. Sleep must be the problem. And of course, people come to me for sleep, but it's not.
Yeah,
Sleep's the scapegoat sometimes.
that's right.
You've talked about plate spinning, and maybe this is the time where I can admit some of the coaching that you've supported me on in the plate spinning that I used to do, where I had too many plates in the air. I had never heard of that phrase plate spinning before getting coaching from you. And I was like a really good plate spinner. Well, not good. I was very skilled at having too many plates spinning, including trying to listen to, multiple things at the same time. I still remember you calling me out on that. You're like, Heather, you're killing me here. Like, put some of these plates down. Tell us a little more about plate spinning because that'll be new to my listeners as well.
Right.
What is it and why are we doing it so much?
So for a lot of A-type overachieving, driven, ambitious women, they've learned to be responsible for a lot of things. So they've learned to not only be responsible for themselves, but for everybody else. And they've bought into this belief that they should be able to multitask things. So you should be able to read a book and listen to a podcast at the same time while doing the dishes, while having a load of laundry on. Again, all distractions from being connected with ourselves. And, so just coming back to what you were saying a minute ago about, taking that time to connect with your child. If you are struggling to connect with your child, it's because you are not connected with yourself. Period. Hard stop. We cannot be in relationship with others at a deep connected level if we are not in relationship with ourselves at a deep connected level. And we cannot do that when we have so many responsibilities and every moment of our time we're trying to shove something more into it. Because what is that really about? What are we trying to accomplish? Because inputting more information over and over and over doesn't actually yield better results. It doesn't get you anywhere faster. It just leads to a place where you feel like nothing is getting done, right? Or if it's getting done, it's like half-ass getting done because you don't have your whole ass. So, one of our mentors says to us that, one horse, one ass. And I'm like, well, that's lovely in theory. Yes, and said no woman ever, right? We got a stable of horses. We have a stable of horses. That's just the reality. And there is one of us. So you are going to have to ride multiple horses, but you cannot ride them all at the same time. So it's really looking at the things that are taking your time, that you're being responsible for, and asking yourself, is this my responsibility or can somebody else be responsible for this? Am I willing to ask for help? Cringe, says so many of my clients, because we don't want to ask for help. We want to be the helpers, not the helpee. But that just shows the amount of judgment that we have around being helped, right? What meaning we're giving to being helped. And, back in the day, we didn't have infants solo. We worked within tribes and everybody helped to raise the babies. And now we're, in these solo environments. So it's looking at all the things that you believe you're responsible for. Is this actually my responsibility? Can I delegate this to somebody else? Can I let it go altogether? Like, do I need to be doing this? What am I hoping to gain from listening to a podcast and reading a book at the same time? Like, what is actually going in? So, getting clear on the things that you value most and starting to take a minimalistic approach, right? How do I want to really be present with my time? So, if I want to listen to this podcast, I'm going to listen to this podcast. And I'm not against multitasking. Like, if I'm going to do food prep, sometimes it's nice to have it quiet. And sometimes it's nice to have a podcast on because then I can just listen to it because I'm doing, no mind food prep or doing the dishes or whatever. But we have to get really honest with ourselves about how much we're trying to do all at once and if it's actually creating the results that we want for ourselves or if it's just feeding the story that we're still not good enough. We still can't know it all. We're still not there yet. So put down a few of the plates,
Mhm.
get clear on how you really want to feel in your life, right? Like you had a lot going on all at the same time. And now look at how much more you've accomplished in your life, in your business, personally, professionally, since you've gotten really clear on what the most important things are for you. That's what yields results. And that's what I mean about doing less better.
Mhm.
If you do less, you will get better results. When you are more connected to yourself, when you're more present in your life, you will get better results. You will have better relationships, all the things. So,
Yeah. Well, and this podcast, people can't see me chuckling in the background when you're talking about reading and listening to a podcast at the same time, but that was totally me thinking somehow I'm going to osmotically get this into my head while I'm doing other things. But yeah, an example, and you brought up the beautiful example of breastfeeding while scrolling, like somehow
mhm.
trying to get something quote unquote productive done while you were literally feeding your baby that keeps them alive and thriving. And that applies again to any age, where at this point in my life, I used to take my headphones with me on a walk because
Yeah.
I wanted to get a little bit further in that podcast or that nonfiction audio book that I was listening to. And I've had to be very deliberate about not making that seem like a bad thing. Like, as you say, there are times where that's a beautiful thing, but to decide that, no, this is my opportunity to practice carrying fewer plates, being aware of my environment, looking up at the moon when I get up fairly early and I love my early morning walks. And looking up at the moon and just being grateful for it being there and listening to the sounds, even if it's just cars on the road. I would miss all of that. I'd be totally in my head if I had my headphones on.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're really talking about is a dopamine detox because we're constantly, like when we're multitasking, we're constantly flooding ourselves with dopamine. And like any other kind of drug, right? The more you get, the more you need. And then you just start feeling worse and worse and worse and worse. So there's time and a place to multitask. Sometimes it's a walk with headphones on, and sometimes it's just walking without headphones on. And the same applies, when I'm in the gym. Sometimes I've got something on in the background that I'm listening to, and sometimes I just have my headphones on just so people won't talk to me, and there's nothing playing in them, right? I'm just going to train to silence today and be with my thoughts. So anytime I find myself, you know, in the doom scroll or just, the endless scroll where you're like, wow, I just lost an hour of my life. I'm never going to get
Mhm.
back. Or I'm constantly finding that I'm trying to disconnect in some way, shape, or form. That's when I know I need to start like unplugging things again and letting things go. Because
Mm.
we can all get trapped in it. I mean, social media is literally designed to pull us in and hold us there. Everything in our life is meant to create distraction for us right now. And it's our jobs to try and minimize those distractions. So I think one of the proudest things in my life right now is the fact that I have a 13-year-old who still doesn't have a phone. I think it's slowly coming to an end. However, to have been able to hold out until 13 with no cell phone, because he hasn't had those habits established early to be on his phone. So hopefully that helps him stay more connected to the natural world as he grows up. But I don't know, it's a pretty strong drug, all of these
It is. It
social
is.
media hooks.
I think something that comes up for me as you're talking about this is the the missed opportunity if we keep ourselves so busy with our attention on our away from our kids.
Yeah.
And I say to parents all the time, like, whatever you are learning about parenthood and motherhood and being present with infants is just as important when they're 13 and 15 and on up, to the point where I know when I'm too busy, I am literally missing out. And you don't get a replay on it. You don't get to figure out, you don't get the recap of what you missed. You literally just miss a comment or a conversation that you could have had with your kids. And whether it's a nonverbal communication with your infant or an in-depth conversation with your teen, if you're not present, you do miss it.
Yeah. Because as your kids get older, what I've found, and you're probably finding this as well, parenting becomes like highly intuitive. It is about body language and cues and energy that you're picking up on and hunches. And if you are so busy and distracted in your life, you're not going to see, you're not going to pick up on those things, right? So intentionally creating time. So, Jake, my youngest, is 13 now. I drive him to school every day. I don't have to drive him to school. His dad could take him to school, but that's my time to be with him. And sometimes he doesn't say anything to me the whole way. Sometimes I talk and he listens and rolls his eyes at my wisdom. But you never know what's going in. You never know what's landing, but it's making sure that that time is available so that when he chooses to bring something to the table, that he already knows that that space and container is there. And Jake has come to me with some pretty profound things. So it's not all the time, but there's been many times where I've been like, wow, I love that he trusts me to come and have this conversation with me. But that's because I've worked at building connection with him. And even with that, there have been really challenging moments. Like I said, stepping into redefining what a good mom is, if there's such a thing as a bad mom, which there are, abuse, etc. But redefining what I wanted, how I wanted to define being a good mom. And it wasn't about, like I said, baking cookies or the PTA meetings or the volume of time. For me, it's about the depth of time and the depth of connection. So again, it doesn't have to be more, but the connection that is there has to be deep, and there has to be a level of trust and safety for my kids. That is more important than giving my kids all the time and all the stuff. Many of us grew up with the parents that ticked the boxes of parenthood, right? Like did all the right things. Yet we are completely disconnected from our parents. They don't offer this space of safety and trust. So I could care less now about ticking the boxes of what we believe we should do as parents. And I'm about breaking the mold and really going, you know what? Some of these things don't matter. Like they just don't. My kids can pack their own lunches. I can help them with it. But making sure that that space and time for connection and presence is there with them, that's more important. And with my older boys, because I really wasn't present with them when they were young, I've had to work harder. They were kind of in their early teens, 11, yeah, 10, 11, when I started to go through my transformation. So it's been years of cleaning up those relationships and building that connection from that place. But I can't go back in time to when they were an infant. So again, there's also been a lot of forgiveness around, even though I didn't know what I didn't know, my kids are going to have their own path, and they're still going to be amazing humans, and they're going to need therapy and coaching when they're older too. There are no perfect kids, but challenging myself still, like, well, how can I repair some of the things that I didn't know might have been causing harm when they were young? How can I do better now to my adult kids? So this is why I say it doesn't end, because even when I travel, I still make sure I check in with my adult kids. And part of me is like, I don't want to do this, like they're grown adults, but instead of putting it on them to check in with me, which is how kind of past
Mhm.
generations, right? Like you take care of your parents. It's like, no, how can I check in with them? How can I show them that I am still here for them, and that this relationship isn't a hierarchy of me here and you guys here? Let's be on like the same platform together and support each other as a team. So that's just kind of my that's my approach to parenting now, which is a long way from where it used to be.
The self-compassion piece, or not carrying around the guilt or the shame of not having had the good enough parent or being a good mom.
Yeah.
Why is self-compassion so hard? You talk about doing the hard work, but getting that self-compassion, why is it so hard for us to have compassion? That same compassion that we give to our babies and our kiddos when we're at least on our game. Why don't we give that to ourselves more readily?
Did you have it modeled to you growing up?
I suppose not.
I didn't. And I'm not saying that my mom was a bad mom. She wasn't. But I was not taught about how to have self-compassion. Like we did not learn these things, right? We learned, I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. We learned be home when the streetlights were on, don't die, drink from the hose, right? Like
Mhm.
if you fell and skinned your knee, it was get up, suck it up. Like your feelings don't matter. So we didn't learn how to be compassionate with ourselves. Our parents didn't model that to us. I mean, I grew up in the era of the wooden spoon, right? Like that was legit a thing, right? Like, and I remember I was such a deviant. I was like, just bring it. Like, I just got to the point where I was like, just whatever. But these were things that happened. Like it was about punishment. It was about do as you say, do as I say, right? Children are here to be seen and not heard. There's no room in there for compassion. We learn to be hard on ourselves. We learn to be hard on ourselves. We learn if we need to get ahead, we have to push ourselves, be abusive towards ourselves, pick up the stick, beat ourselves up. So we don't learn self-compassion. So here we are now. So Gen Xers have swung so wide. We've now become, not me, but many have become helicopter parents where they're overcompensating for their kids. And now their kids need to be bubble wrapped and don't know how to, you know, deal with their own conflicts and stuff. So now we've got a problem the other way. But still, every generation is going to get a little bit better, in terms of teaching compassion. But when it comes to parenting, your kids are always watching what you're doing. So they hear the words that come out of your mouth. But if your actions are not congruent with your words and your energy, doesn't matter. So if you're telling your kids to love their body and be compassionate with themselves, and then they're hearing you talk negatively about yourself or beat up on yourself, they're going to go, wait a minute, why is that? And this is all happening in an unconscious level. Why is that okay for me, but not for my mom? My mom's amazing. So she's being hard on herself. How come I get to be good enough, but my mom's not good enough? Again, this is all happening at that unconscious level. So it is so, so important that if you are going to teach your kids about emotional fluency and acknowledging their emotions and allowing them to have them and self-compassion and self-love, that's your medicine too. That is your responsibility to model that as well and to lean into it. Because if you're uncomfortable with self-compassion, how are you going to expect your kids to be comfortable with it? So again, that, congruency is so important for me, that the outsides and the insides match. And we have to move away from this, like, do as I say, but not as I do mentality. Oh, you need to eat healthy, but I'm going to shove a few candy bars in my mouth while I'm prepping dinner. And then I'm going to, not be hungry because I ate all the junk food while I'm feeding you healthy food, but you can't have the junk food, right?
Right.
Kids are always picking up on this isn't making sense in my brain.
Yeah.
So
Well, and it brings up this idea that I think I've heard from you or elsewhere and you, this idea that we cannot love someone else more than we love ourselves. The idea of self-love being the ceiling. Like we need to learn self-love to
yeah.
be able to appreciate ourselves. What are your
I
thoughts
think
on
we
that?
often project what's missing for us onto other people, right? So I'm going to love you hard. I'm going to care for you. I'm going to be everything for you. We're giving to that person what we've been unwilling to give to ourselves in an unconscious attempt to feel full, to feel like, now I feel loved, right? And I think many of us grew up feeling like we didn't belong. like we weren't loved, like we weren't safe, right? Again, all on an unconscious level. And we're not throwing our parents under the bus. Like, but this is the stuff that comes up in adulthood. And you're like, oh, wow, these things impacted me. So I know my parents love me, and little me interpreted it in this way. So, we go out and we find individuals who are literal representations of what's going on inside of us. And we try and fix them and heal them and love them. If we can just love them enough, then they'll love themselves. Then they'll see how amazing they are. This is like an excerpt from my own life. And never recognizing, like, oh my God, I'm not loving myself. And, when I first realized this for myself, I remember looking at my therapist at the time and saying, oh my God, like, I didn't realize how little I loved myself and how little reverence that I had for myself. So I was living this life of, taking care of myself and super healthy and all of those things. But really, underneath it all my behavior showed me that I wasn't really loving myself. But I was the person out there with the biggest heart, always giving, right? Always taking care of other people. And I think a lot of people in the helping and healing coaching space, right? That's ultimately they're working from their wounds. If I can just go out and help other people, then I'll feel better. And to some degree, you do, but you still end up often in this place of like resentment and feeling like you're not getting back what you're giving. And that's when we get to recognize, like, oh, we're giving with strings, we're giving with attachment, right? We're trying to get our own needs met. So I do think you can love other people deeply. But I think the key is to look at how deeply are you loving other people, and can you honestly say that you are showing up with that same love, care, and attention for yourself? Because you've heard me say that things we love and we value, we take care of. So if you're not taking care of yourself, what does that say about how you're treating yourself? Would you treat your child that way? Would you treat your best friend that way? Would you treat your partner that way? And just starting to dip your toe into, like, self-love doesn't need to be this airy fairy thing. I think the concept of self-love, like most people say, yeah, I love myself, without really understanding what it means. And it is really looking at, well, if you love yourself, are you a priority in your life? And that doesn't mean saying screw it to everybody else. Like, I'm just gonna throw you all under the bus and, be egotistical about myself. But it's simply saying, like, there's more than enough for me to give to you, and there's more than enough for me to give to me. And the more that I give to me, the more I have to give to you. And it becomes this beautiful, like, place of reciprocity versus always pushing that love out, but underneath it feeling like you're not worthy and deserving of that love, or that you're trying so desperately to earn it from other people or earn it from your achievements. But we cannot create self-love from the outside in. It has to start on the inside. It has to be something that ultimately we get to be responsible for. And, when you've got a baby, that's like the last thing you're thinking about, because you're just like, holy crap, how do I keep this little thing alive? And are you sure it's mine? And for how many years? So, it's creating space for the both. Can I love my baby, and can I love myself just as much as I'm loving my baby? And I see that it's as equally as important, because the more I can show up for myself, the more I'm going to be able to model love and connection for that infant and really teach her or him how to love themselves, because that's a big part of parenting too, is not just teaching our kids compassion, but teaching them what it means to really, truly, deeply love themselves.
Yeah, it's not either or. I think we
No,
forget that it's not either or.
no.
We have covered a lot of ground, Lisa, but I want to ask you if there is something that, in general, in this realm of conversation, that you think we, as in everyone, should be talking about more, something that's getting dropped in the conversation.
I think I started the call with this around, I think we need to be having more honest conversations about motherhood and the myths and beliefs that we have about it. I think it's time that we start redefining what we want motherhood to look like, because, we're basing it on outdated models that don't really match the realities that we're living in today. I think that it's so important that we let go of perfectionism as mothers and recognize like there is no perfect, there's no way to measure it, and that loving our kids is truly enough, right? Allowing them to feel loved, safe, and belong is enough. And yeah, just that there's always room for more compassion. But, there was a lot in this hour. I think there's going to be a lot of nuggets that people can pull out from here that will hopefully support them. But, just sending my love to anybody who's listening, who's really struggled with stepping into that role of mom and feeling like, you've put on a new pair of shoes that just don't quite fit right. Everything is temporary. And I know that parents of older kids say it goes by in a flash. And when I was in it, I didn't believe them. And now I'm like, wow, it goes by so quickly. And you cannot go back and recapture those moments that you miss. So don't be hard on yourself about the moments, but become more mindful about doing what you can to be present in more of them. Focus on depth over width with your kids. And really make sure you're taking good care of yourself, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And the more you can show up for yourselves, the better parent and partner you're going to be, and leader.
I have loved this conversation, Lisa. I appreciate so much all the wisdom and gems. There are a lot of gems in this. In fact, I would encourage anyone to go back and listen again, even if you're multitasking while listening. Where can people find you, Lisa, if they're interested in learning more?
I'm always over on Instagram. I like to hang out in Instagram stories because it's light and easy. So they can find me at Lisa Carpenter Inc. on Instagram. I also have my own podcast called the Full Frontal Living Podcast, although we've been on hiatus because I've been in a season of just needing to be more compassionate with myself. So we have over like 300 episodes. So we've been repurposing episodes, but we will be putting new ones out. So you can find that, the Full Frontal Living Podcast, or you can head over to my website at lisacarpenter.ca. And we've got a bunch of stuff up there and private podcasts and things and stuff. And I'm pretty easy to locate.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, again, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate this conversation.
It was a really, really beautiful conversation, Heather. And thank you so much for having me on and sharing me with your audience. I deeply appreciate it. And it's just been such a pleasure to watch your growth as one of your, coaches kind of behind the scenes. It's been really amazing to watch you let go of things and step into more. So I'm just wishing you nothing but success and more impact for the women that you're here to support.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.